Hello, my name is Bobby Risher, and in my presentation, I want to ask the question, can we eliminate our dependence on fossil fuel? Now, renewable energy is naturally occurring and naturally replenishing. In a society that relies heavily on non-renewable fossil fuel, and where more and more of society at large is becoming concerned with the impact that the use of fossil fuels is having on the environment, there's a great amount of interest in solar and wind power that some hope will one day replace fossil fuels. From this interest came a surge in solar and wind technologies, and companies such as Tesla became heads of the industry in renewable power, gaining billions of dollars in revenue from residential solar panels, electric cars, etc. Solar energy owes its first appearance to a man named Edmund Becquerel in 1839. This young physicist was the first to discover the photovoltaic effect, a phenomenon that describes the generation of an electric current in a material upon exposure to light. Edmund observed this effect when he placed silver chloride in an acidic solution, connected to platinum electrodes, and exposed it to light. This resulted in a voltage and a current being produced. 44 years later, in 1883, Charles Fritz coated selenium with a thin layer of gold. This generated a small electrical current when illuminated and was the first instance of a solar cell, with an efficiency of about 2%. Solar efficiency is determined as the percentage of sunlight hitting the cell that is then converted to electricity. Fast forward 142 years, and this percentage has increased to 15 to 20% in modern solar panels, with residential panels producing between 370 to 415 watts per hour. The most common solar panels are monocrystalline. These have a higher efficiency and power capacity, reaching around 20% conversion rates, as opposed to polycrystalline cells that are a lot less efficient, with only about a 17% conversion rate and have higher energy cost of production. These modern solar panels have a life expectancy of about 25 to 30 years, a bit less with polycrystalline, and offset the carbon footprint used in the manufacturing, raw material extraction, transportation, installation, and disposal within 3 years of running. A pretty impressive accomplishment and one of the many reasons for the interest in solar technology. However, as solar panels are becoming increasingly popular, there's increasing concern and skepticism regarding the sustainability. Some issues include the land use, with the Roadrunner plant, largely in the state of Texas, covering 2,770 acres of land that alters and potentially disrupts ecosystems, as land usually has to be completely cleared of all vegetation. A study done in Riverside County, California, suggests that the solar energy development taking place in the region is redirecting water flows and destroying habitats. Disposal is another concern. As new, more energy efficient solar panels are being produced, there is a kind of out with the old and with a new incentive to replace older models. And as more and more advancements are being made, there are concerns for a potential mass buildup of solar panel waste, with estimated waste totaling 78 million tons by 2050. Solar farms are also having an impact on birds, which are having their wings burned as they fly above them, with an estimation of over 138,000 deaths. However, comparing this to the 14.5 million avian deaths attributed to fossil fuel power plants, solar energy is still the safer option. These are some of the lighter issues, and I will talk about the biggest concern with solar and wind later on in the presentation. But for now, let's move on to wind turbines. These are also being monetized as a great source of green energy, with their beginning starting in 1887, when an electrical engineer made one of the first instances of a wind turbine, which he used to power his home, using large cloth cells to power it. He even offered to power the main street of his hometown, but the townspeople, believing electricity was the work of the devil, declined the offer. Today, most modern turbine blades are made of 50% carbon fiber to keep them as lightweight as possible and produce 47 million kilowatt hours of energy every year, with a 25 to 30 year life expectancy. If you have ever seen a wind turbine up close, the first thing you notice is its massive size. A single blade that is again designed to be lightweight still weighs over 35 tons. 900 tons of steel, 2,500 tons of concrete, and 45 tons of non-recyclable plastic is used to construct a single turbine, not to mention the energy cost of transporting and constructing this behemoth of a machine. It is no wonder the sustainability of these massive machines are being called into question. There's a 2024 drama series I thought was interesting called The Landman that has a scene where the main protagonist, Tommy Norris, a crisis executive of an oil company, says a lot to discredit wind turbines as a green source of energy, including a monologue where he states, in its 20-year lifespan, it won't offset the carbon footprint of making it. This has been tossed around in social media, making people question the validity of wind turbines as a clean source of energy. Much of what this protagonist is saying, however, is complete misinformation, as a wind turbine lasts 25 to 30 years and offsets its carbon footprint in about 7 months. However, there are some true concerns about wind energy. For instance, much like solar energy, wind takes up a lot of space, there's a lot of waste, and many bird species are also affected by running into the large moving blades. Each year, about 140,000 to 679,000 birds are killed, and 33,000 to 110,000 bats die each year from wind turbines. a fact some downplay by comparing that number to the between 1.3 and 4 billion birds killed annually by the common house cat. But it is not pigeons and songbirds that are being killed by turbines. It is at-risk migratory birds and bat species and raptors like hawks and eagles that are being disproportionately affected. Species I doubt an average house cat hunts. But the biggest inhibitors of switching to wind and solar isn't the mild impacts it has to the environment. It's the 150 plus year independence on fossil fuels that makes the conversion to solar and wind improbable. Oil constitutes about one third of US energy consumption. Over 82% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, 8.7% from nuclear, more on that later, and only 8.8% comes from renewable sources, with wind and solar energy accounting for just 3% of that. One thing from Landman that was true is that we do not have the transmission lines to support this wind and solar powered vision. Transmission lines are specialized cables that carry electrical power across large distances to substations near populated areas. These transition lines take a lot of planning and a lot of construction, typically 7 to 10 years, and it would take much longer to implement them to get the solar and wind power to your homes. And even if we did switch over to renewable energy completely, this would not stump out our need for fossil fuels because there are so many things made with fossil fuels. Crude oil is in everything. It is in the gas in our cars, in our planes, in our stoves. 99% of plastic is made from chemicals sourced from fossil fuels. Ink, food preservatives, insect repellent, soap, toothpaste, shampoo, deodorant, refrigerant, phones, computers, windmills, solar panels, thousands of products that we have made essential to our daily lives. And the fossil fuels aren't in the products themselves, they're in the factories that make them. They're in the cars, the planes, the trains, the ships that transport them to our stores. We are a civilization built on fossil fuels, and that is not going to change anytime soon. The best we can hope for is to decrease our dependence, but solar and wind may not be the answer, not yet, and not by themselves at least. This brings me to a possible alternative that is pretty controversial, but shows a lot of promise. Nuclear power has had a lot of stigma around it for a while, and it is not without reason. Nuclear power plant failure can have catastrophic events. Chernobyl in 1986 being a clear example of the dangers, with much of the area still being dangerously radioactive. Since this tragedy, many in the environmental community are extremely hesitant to give their stamp of approval to nuclear power. However, after the events of Chernobyl, there have been many advancements in nuclear energy to ensure such a disaster never happens again, which has greatly decreased safety concerns, making the chances of another failure next to impossible. Area surrounding Chernobyl, although still radioactive, has actually become a wildlife haven for the plants and animals that have managed to seemingly build a resistance to the radiation. There are also many positives to nuclear energy. It is carbon free, releasing no greenhouse gases associated with global warming. The average power plant generates 1 to 2 billion kilowatts of energy a day, having a higher generating ability than any other energy source, including natural gas, and generating power more reliably, with uranium being 16,000 times more energy dense than coal. 0.007 pounds of fuel is required to generate a full megawatt hour of electricity, and you can simply do more with less. There are 98 operating nuclear reactors at 61 nuclear power plants in the United States, which accounts for 8.7% of America's energy supply. Comparing that to the 4,185 solar facilities and over 73,000 wind turbines and other renewable sources that barely beat out this number by 0.1%, only because we are producing so much more. Nuclear plants take up less land than solar and wind and use less materials in the long run, ultimately making them a better, more reliable source of electricity. In conclusion, renewable energy is a path forward, but perhaps not in the ways we believed, and not to the extent we hoped for. We are not going to stop needing fossil fuels and the many products derived from them. Solar and wind energy, although promising, is still in need of many technological advancements if it ever hopes to match nuclear, the most promising energy alternative. That's not to say it's not possible. Solar panels will only have a conversion rate of 20%. Imagine if and when that percentage is increased to 30, even 40, which may be on the far horizon. Nuclear energy has proved to be extremely dangerous in the past, but in the present, it has proved to be reliable, efficient, and yes, safe. Our dependence on fossil fuels will likely never be stamped out, at least not in our generation or in the next. There's just too much we make out of it, even excluding the energy it supplies. But its use can be limited to sustainable numbers, and advancements in solar, wind, nuclear, and other forms of alternative energy are the way forward, in combination with fossil fuel, not in its exclusion. And here are the credits. I hope you learned something from this presentation, and I hope I was able to answer the question, can we eliminate dependence to fossil fuels? The answer, unfortunately, is no, but it can be limited. Well, that is the end of my presentation. Have a great day.